Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. It was a beautiful autumn day. The sky was piercingly blue, and the trees, dressed in gold and crimson, radiated a soft, warm glow. The air was clean and fresh, filled with the scents of damp earth and fallen leaves, as if intoxicating in its purity. In the quiet of the old park, Robert sat on a bench, his gaze fixed on Buddy, a large Labrador. Buddy, with magnificent golden fur shimmering in the rays of the autumn sun, was visibly enjoying himself as he ran among the trees, stirring up whirlwinds of fallen leaves. Suddenly, Buddy slammed on the brakes. At full speed, he plunged into a tall pile of fallen leaves, burying himself headfirst. A multicolored whirlwind rose around him. Dropping low to the ground, Buddy froze and looked at Robert. "Why are you sitting there glued to the spot? Come on over, let's jump together," Buddy's gaze seemed to say. "This is so much fun." Buddy snorted loudly several times, trying to free his nose from clinging cobwebs and bits of leaves. Grabbing a small branch, he raced towards the bench where Robert was sitting. "Well, my golden boy?" Robert stroked Buddy's neck with affection as he ran up. With a careful movement, he wiped the cobweb from his nose. "You're acting like a puppy today." Buddy lifted his head, and his large, shiny eyes stared into Robert's face. His tail wagged furiously, his whole body twitched impatiently. He crouched, lifted a paw, and looking at Robert questioningly, gently tugged. "Calm down," Robert said with a cheerful laugh. "What's with this burst of youth today? Did you come here to play with me?" "No, I can't right now." He added more quietly, "It will pass later. Others will be jumping then, but around me." Robert laughed softly again, but this time the laugh was bitter. "If only David were here with us, he would have run with you." Robert suddenly fell silent, his face twitching as if in pain. Forcing the words out with difficulty, he added, "And if Sarah were here with us, I'm sure she would have jumped with you. I remember all your tricks. She taught you that, didn't she?" Buddy, hearing the sound of the beloved voice, and likely familiar intonations, whimpered. He wagged his tail wildly and sat down next to the bench. He continued to hold the broken branch in his teeth. Evidently, he hadn't quite given up hope of involving Robert in a fun game. However, he was clearly happy just sitting nearby and feeling the touch. Robert, continuing to mechanically stroke Buddy's head and habitually letting the silky ears slip through his fingers, inhaled a portion of the fragrant, fresh autumn air with pleasure. He closed his eyes. Memories, joyful and bitter, bright and sad, suddenly flooded over him. Their family wasn't particularly wealthy. Sarah had worked as a librarian her whole life and joked a little bitterly that, fortunately, she had managed to retire before the internet killed all libraries. His father had worked as a foreman at a factory. All the short time he had free from work, he would rustle newspapers, eye Sarah suspiciously, and demand good grades from David. David, who dearly loved his mother, was a little afraid of his father, although he loved him with some strange, forced kind of love. His father was a stranger to David, incomprehensible and unkind. It was terrible, but the boy couldn't change his feelings towards him. Perhaps, as an adult, he might have been able to understand his father better, to mend their relationship. But there wasn't enough time for that. His father died suddenly. The 9-year-old David was left with Sarah. After her husband's death, she became despondent, as if she had lost not a sullen, perpetually dissatisfied man, constantly suspecting her of some mythical infidelities, but a loving spouse. After school, David entered university, specializing in engineering. He had doubts about the correctness of his career choice. A relative came to the rescue, Sarah's brother. Uncle George had a small garage auto repair shop where he fixed and resold cars. All that fluff, all those petty lawyers and traders, it's all temporary. Needed today, gone tomorrow, he boomed in his smoke-roughened bass, listening to his nephew's doubts. And what kind of work is that, God forgive me, for a real man, shuffling papers and cheating others? Bah! But I have a real job, a man's job. Uncle George straightened up proudly and began pounding his chest with a rather large fist, bearing traces of engine oil permanently ingrained in the skin. And I'll always have clients and work. I'll always earn enough for bread and butter, and even caviar if I want. And you, nephew, come work for me. I'll get you into the trade. You'll start actually doing what they're cramming into you theoretically at your universities. Besides, you'll start earning some money. Stop being a burden on your mother. This was an argument, and a very serious one. David had long been trying to earn some money here and there. But all of that, combined with his mom's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Working at Uncle George's shop somehow clicked for him right away. He turned out to be a person with an innate technical grasp and intuition. He was interested in everything he saw and did there, and wanted to know and be able to do even more. Yes, nephew, your hands are certainly skilled, Uncle George said. With those hands and a bit more brains, you'll be priceless. Now go study, he barked sternly as a disciplinary measure. He studied easily, with pleasure. In the evenings and on weekends, he worked in the shop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was calmly entrusted with independent car repairs, starting with simple cases, but over time, more responsible and complex ones. Time passed quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he finished university, David was already an accomplished mechanic who, despite his youth, had already earned a solid reputation among car owners, perpetually anxious about endless breakdowns. Sonny, that's wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. Sarah stroked David's new diploma with pride. That's a very suitable profession for a man. Yes, Mom. You think so? David looked playfully at Sarah. But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious. And my hands would be clean, he added, looking at his palms, covered in calluses, small abrasions, and indelible spots of engine oil. Oh, come on, Sonny. That's nonsense. My dear brother, of course, talks a lot of hot air, but he's right about this. You have a wonderful man's profession, Sarah smiled. Just don't laugh, Sonny. But I've always thought the ideal family is when the husband is an engineer and the wife is a doctor. Mom, you're something else, David burst out laughing. Why a doctor specifically? Oh, come on, that's silly. I, for example, will definitely never, under any circumstances, be able to love a woman doctor. I think they're all a bit cold. David and Sarah laughed cheerfully and were happy. The categorical way he judged women doctors was no accident. It was hard to explain, but something connected with medicine caused him some unpleasant feelings from early childhood. The boy desperately sabotaged trips to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician who came to the house. As an adult, he never even went to the clinic. Being a healthy person, he was completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were no reason to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just as he ignored seasonal colds. However, this time he couldn't avoid visiting medical institutions. He needed certificates to renew his driver's license. "Who's last?" Robert asked, approaching the office door, addressing the sufferers sitting along the wall, just like himself. "Not last, but next in line. I am," one of them mumbled, and receiving no response, looked up at him. "You're after me. Hey, you're after me. Do you hear? Hey, guy, are you deaf or something?" The man indignantly tried to get his attention, but he didn't hear or see anything around him. He saw only an incredible, almost unearthly creature, walking or rather floating down the shabby clinic corridor. A magical vision in the form of a short, slender young woman in a white coat fluttered past the frozen man and disappeared behind the office door. He sank bewildered onto a chair next to the angry man who was next in line, and suddenly felt his heart pounding. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad it wasn't an appointment. A young woman sat at the table by the window. Sunbeams, tangled in the strands of her reddish hair, created a halo effect around her head. "Hello, come in, have a seat," said a voice that seemed angelic to him. "Any complaints? Are you taking any medications?" she asked, without lifting her head and quickly writing something on the form lying before her on the table. "What?" he stupidly repeated, unable to take his eyes off the doctor's golden glow. "Are you taking any medications?" She lifted her head and looked closely at his face. His breath caught, blood rushed to his cheeks, and his legs trembled. What was all the poor man could stammer out. "All right, let me see your hands," she said, walking decisively towards the man sitting like a statue. He caught a light, barely perceptible scent of perfume. "Roll up your shirt sleeves higher. Higher still, please. Good. You can lower them. Look at me. No, not like that." She reached out and gently lifted his head, looking closely into his face. "Are you feeling unwell? Just please don't say—" "What?" he predictably said. "All right, young man," she said, looking at the documents. "Your behavior is, to put it mildly, a bit strange. What's wrong with you?" She looked very closely at his face again. "I love you, doctor," Robert said bewilderedly. The doctor froze. Her face, professionally composed, suddenly looked bewildered. "Do you need this certificate that badly?" she suddenly asked quietly, sitting down next to him. "Yes. I'll write you the certificate, young man. You don't have to go to such extremes for that." "No, doctor, no. This isn't for a certificate. This is for life." And Robert, looking her straight in the eye, laughed loudly. A few months later, Robert and Emily got married. His mother, Sarah, happy, incredibly radiant from this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye. Several times, unable to resist, she would glance at his young wife and giggle cheerfully, like a girl. Their love wasn't like an all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifice and selflessness from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Although Emily tried to get something from Robert, it was unsuccessful. "You know, you really ought to be monitored. This is no joke. And you're no longer, shall we say, a young man." "Well, you've made trouble for yourself," Robert grumbled. "I was living happily, and now look what I've got. A medical board at home. Stop it. Everything's fine with me. And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep," he laughed. "Right," she shook her head disapprovingly. "Words worthy of a teenager. All right, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life." Emily still managed to get Robert to agree to an examination. There, they examined him at length and tediously, sat him down, laid him down, attached some clips and suction cups. Then they looked at the test results with a thoughtful expression. As a result, they told him to avoid strenuous activity and eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty foods. In short, everything that tasted good. However, Robert didn't delve into the details at all. He just wanted to appease Emily. He was also prescribed some pills. Making an honest face, he swore to Emily he would take them regularly and naturally, completely forgot about them as soon as he left the house. He loved Emily very much and was completely happy. She, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life, and would have been happy too, if not for one but. She very much wanted a child, but despite all their efforts, a baby remained only a dream for now. "Don't be so upset. We have time. What's the rush?" he said, sitting next to her on the sofa. "My own parents had me when they were almost 40, and look how I turned out. Do you have any complaints about me? Just stick to the facts, please." "Jokester!" Emily lightly tapped Robert's head with her fist. "Always joking. Well, yes, you certainly have no need to rush." She shook her head sadly. "You, my dear man, are like men and wine. You only get better with age. But I'm a woman, you see. I only get older with the years." "What nonsense! Where did you pick up such foolishness?" He looked at Emily in surprise. "It's not foolishness. It's the truth, dear. Do you know what they call women like me in medicine when they're expecting a child?" She glanced at Robert questioningly. "Elderly primigravida." She pronounced the unpleasant word clearly and smiled bitterly. "So you have everything ahead of you, but I need to get moving. And you too, by the way." She shook off the gloom and, as was her habit, ended the difficult conversation with a joke. "Hear that, my beloved husband. Get a move on." She jumped up from the sofa and stood before him, hands on her hips. Robert looked at Emily, girlishly slender, thin, light, with red hair that hadn't faded with the years. He looked at her dear face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, devils dance, and he felt the familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that hadn't faded with the years. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and it was as if higher powers had heard their conversation. Exactly 9 months later, the elderly primigravida, who carried her pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl, gave birth to a boy easily and quickly. Dazed by worries, unfamiliar thoughts, and anxieties, the father held his son for the first time. He looked fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face. The answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. "Redhead," the happy father breathed out. "He's a redhead, just like you." "He's not a redhead at all." Emily took the baby from Robert, who was standing awkwardly bent over, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. "He's simply golden. Our golden boy." They named their son after a name that became a symbol of hope for them. Long awaited, hard won, late of course, he was the light of their lives for his parents. Both a joy and a hope. David grew into a healthy and clever lad. He didn't shine with any particular talents, but he studied without failing, which is to say, normally. He drew quite well and strummed the guitar. With enthusiasm, like all boys, he sat playing computer games, but at least he didn't become addicted and wasn't unhappy to let his parents take him to the dacha, where shashlik and pie awaited him. True, these joint family evenings and trips for the three of them became less frequent. The reason was Robert's preoccupation with his work, his business. By the time David turned 10, Robert was already firmly on his feet. He owned several workshops, auto repair shops, and it all started with that very same workshop belonging to Uncle George, where he had started working part-time from his first year of university. The childless, much older Uncle George completely handed over his workshop to Robert a few years after his nephew finished university. At the same time, he negotiated the right to come any time, and if he wished, as he put it, shake off the dust, by joining in on some simple repair. True, in most cases, Uncle George's visits were limited to discussing his nephew's skills and business acumen. "Well, look at that," he would explain with feeling and pleasure to some old client or friend. "I'm the one who got him into all this back then. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere now. But with me, he became a mechanic. And what a mechanic! See? Honestly, he's already bought all this equipment. It doesn't even fit in the place anymore. Listen, he tells me, Uncle, I'm opening a second workshop. I'm going to build a network of services. What an idiot! Do you hear? Can you imagine how they'll tax him now? And he'll take out loans for the equipment, and for the rent, and for the salaries of all those loafers. Does he really need that? He should just sit quietly, turn wrenches for bread and caviar. After all, he has golden hands and a head on his shoulders, God bless him. But no, he's sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Uncle George would break into an old smoker's cough, shake his head indignantly, and wave his hands. But his eyes shone with pride for his nephew. Robert's business was large and troublesome. It took up more and more of his time. Darling, here's the thing. David and I thought about it, talked it over, and decided to get a dog. Emily looked carefully at Robert, who had unexpectedly stayed home that evening and hadn't rushed off somewhere, as usual, on an urgent call. A dog! Robert was shocked and indignant. Do you even realize what a dog in the house means? It's noise, fuss, fur, dirt. They bring all sorts of germs into the house. He thought for a moment and added, for some reason, fur everywhere, you understand. And most importantly, you have to walk it, the dog, every day. Emily looked at Robert mockingly, and at his last sentence she burst out laughing. Every day, really? Is that true? She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. I really don't know what to say. You've simply astonished me. Imagine walking it every day. I always thought dogs peed once a week. You take it out, say, on Tuesday, and forget about it until next week. Are you mocking me? Robert stated, looking at Emily, shaking with quiet laughter. He generally liked dogs, but preferred to do so at a distance, so to speak, abstractly. As it happened, he himself had never had pets, neither as a child nor as a young man. True, when he was about 12, to his considerable dismay, he was given a fish tank. Despite all his efforts, the fish somehow died quickly and quietly. Robert felt a strange inner relief then, which, of course, he carefully hid from his family. Keeping a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, connected with endless troubles and the need to do things he really didn't want to do. For example, trudging outside in the rain and slush, instead of lying on a comfortable sofa under a cozy, fluffy blanket and watching his favorite movie. What do you need this for? Robert made another attempt to influence Emily. Why do you need another dog? Don't you have enough to worry about with us? Emily looked him in the eye. I don't have enough to worry about. Can you imagine? And especially, I don't have enough of you. She withdrew her hands, moved away, and sat on a stool. And then suddenly, she added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Robert looked up at her in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her. Dry, somehow alien. I don't understand why you're concerned about the inconvenience of a dog. You're never home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here? He choked out indignantly. And she, not letting him object, continued, I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my darling. Now is as good a time as any, since things have turned out this way. We miss you. Do you understand? Both of us. Your endless trips, business trips. You've been coming home just to sleep for a long time now. What's more, we don't even see you at night. Do you think I don't know you've taken to sleeping on the sofa in the living room? I do it so I don't wake you up. Robert looked at Emily with indignation. He was deeply hurt that everything he considered a great personal sacrifice for his family was now being blamed on him. I work like a dog. I'm earning money for you, you know, he almost shouted. So you can have everything. I'm doing all this for you. For you, by the way. You don't have to do it for me, Emily replied quietly. Do you hear? If you want to do something for me, for David, just please be with us more often and for longer. Robert's throat somehow tightened. I'll try, he said, and added, Forgive me, my darling. Try, I forgive you. Emily looked up at him, tucked her unruly red strands behind her ears with a familiar gesture, and added mockingly, "And we're getting a dog anyway." A couple of weeks later, a funny plump Labrador puppy, tripping over his own paws, appeared in the house. "Oh, you even chose a dog just like yourself, a redhead too," Robert stammered, laughing foolishly. "No, well, what?" He stumbled, trying to find the words. "You're both somehow, well, anyway, it's good being with you," Robert managed, and then immediately leaped up with a cry of dismay. The puppy needed only a second to snatch the coveted folder from the table and try to disappear with it into the depths of the apartment. Even when grabbed by the scruff, the puppy tried to defend his prize. The folder, finally in Robert's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. "I take back what I said," he shouted. "With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a rascal! And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber all over everything in just a few seconds?" Buddy sat behind Emily's legs with an almost human grin on his face, while she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning. As Buddy grew, Robert lost count of the ruined shoes, the scratched wallpaper, and as for how many documents carelessly left unsupervised were destroyed by the tailed shredder, it was beyond counting. At the same time, the pet stubbornly chose things that belonged to the head of the family. "He just loves you, you see? He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses what's yours, what smells like you," Emily said cheerfully, comforting Robert. "Well, I guess I'll have to put him down then," Robert joked grimly, sadly examining the latest evidence of Buddy's special puppy love for him. And yet Emily, as always, turned out to be right. Buddy became a true friend to all of them and even united their already happy family. Everything collapsed in an instant. Emily was hit by a car driven by a completely drunk kid. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later. Robert learned about the death by phone. They called him from her mobile phone. "Darling, hello," he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. "Listen, you're always scolding me, but imagine, I just dropped everything and got tickets for the three of us to the seaside. We're flying on Monday. Go on, quickly arrange leave at your hospital. Hello? Can you hear me?" He suddenly fell silent, sensing rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly he became scared. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. "Excuse me," an unfamiliar male voice said on the phone. "Are you so-and-so?" "Yes," Robert rasped in reply, his voice suddenly hoarse. "And who is so-and-so to you? Is this your spouse?" "No, that's my wife," Robert replied, not understanding the word spouse, his mind blank. How could his beloved be a spouse? Spouse was something large, awkward, tiresome, like an old wardrobe. But his beloved was his wife, his darling, his friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. "I'm very sorry, but I have to inform you, there's been an accident. She passed away without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." The unfamiliar voice kept talking. But Robert held the phone, his fingers clenched, trying to grasp one simple thought. His beloved, his wife, his friend, his happiness for life, was gone. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went or drove somewhere, did something, responded to words, handshakes, calls from people. And even then, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all being done by his double. And he himself, the real him, was watching everything from the side. He saw his double collect the body from the hospital. How he, this same double, sat silently beside the coffin, accompanied her to the cemetery, and lowered her into the grave. Then he, this same double, returned home, walked the dejected dog, hugged him, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The next morning after the funeral, Robert was completely alone. Even this same imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen his beloved on her final journey, disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. He woke up to a sunbeam dancing across his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday? Calling herself a housewife," he mumbled, getting out of bed. "My mood's terrible for some reason. Didn't sleep well, maybe? And she ran off somewhere early. Wish she'd come back soon," he thought lazily. "She won't come back. She'll never come back. You'll never see or hear her again. Never," it flashed mercilessly in his head. And as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain. It felt as if it was crushing his ribs and tearing his insides. Buddy, frightened, darted around Robert lying on the floor, yapping softly. His frightened, sleepy son ran in at the noise, called an ambulance, which, fortunately, arrived in time. After suffering a heart attack, Robert, thinner and quieter, realized he would have to learn to live again. Learn not to think in the mornings why Emily wasn't calling them for breakfast. Get used to not waiting for weekends, so the three of them, he, David, and she, taking Buddy, could rush out of town. Not remember that this American film shouldn't be put on because she couldn't stand the actor playing the main role. He was literally going mad from these constant, involuntary lapses into the past, and the agonizing returns from there back to reality, where she wasn't. Having recovered a little, Robert started going not to the office, but to the auto repair shop, and the old faithful work, to which he had been devoted for so many years, reciprocated. It accepted him like a good friend, occupied his hands, time, and thoughts. He gladly pulled on the old oil-stained overalls he hadn't worn for years. To the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else, who looked at him like a demigod, he climbed into the inspection pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They were uncomfortable in his presence. In the eyes of those around him, it was clearly written, "What's gotten into him? This is nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in engine oil. All his fingers are bruised. He's eating some kind of rubbish. It's all incomprehensible, strange. And anyway, he's hanging around here unnecessarily. Now we can't even sneak out for a smoke." Days passed, months went by, and he continued to work regularly in the auto repair shop for several hours a day alongside everyone else. Accustomed to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely. And among themselves, they called him by a respectful nickname derived from his patronymic. If he, busy with his main large-scale affairs, suddenly didn't come to the workshop, they understood that he was already missed. "Hello," the mechanic shouted to the incredibly beautiful young woman secretary from the central office. "Need the boss? He's in the third bay today." The young woman, already used to it, hurried in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Working binges. That's what the company employees jokingly called the times when the owner disappeared into the workshop. "He's gone mad," Uncle George, quite old now but still interfering in affairs, diagnosed him. "You were a fool and you've stayed one, even though your head's already gray. You're the owner. Why are you clanking around with metal here?" "What else should I do? Shuffle papers?" Robert snorted. "And who taught me my whole life that I should do a man's job?" "Well, I'm not taking back my words, but well, Uncle George was clearly flustered. "It's still somehow wrong. It's because you're alone. You're lonely. That's why you're acting out. You need a woman." Uncle George, with his bluntness and directness, hit a sore spot. Robert was indeed very lonely. When Emily was with him, he was never alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if she was far away. But the pain was there. Sarah and Buddy, of course, were nearby. But David, his only beloved, cherished son, didn't fill the void that had appeared in his father's life. For some reason, the death of his mother didn't bring the son and father closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, it divided them. The 16-year-old David, after grieving intensely and demonstratively for his mother, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To Robert's attempts to talk, to become closer, David replied with rude frankness, "Dad, let's be honest. You can't replace Mom for me anyway, and you were never much of a father. No, when it comes to money and all that, I have no complaints about you, fair enough, but don't try to get inside my head." Robert learned to accept this. David behaved quite decently, didn't demand anything extra. He had no bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, never left Robert. He should have been thrashed like a rug. Uncle George, as always, spoke plainly and categorically. But it's too late now. And only Buddy, the faithful dog, waiting for Robert to come home, wildly happy at his arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. On one of his binge days, Robert finally kicked out the office workers who had been bothering him with various questions for a long time. He immersed himself with pleasure in a complex engine repair. The work completely absorbed him, and he didn't immediately notice the female voice coming from the small manager's office. "I called. You booked me for a repair, and now you won't take my car? This is outrageous. I refuse to leave on principle, do you hear?" "Hello," Robert said, wiping his hands as he walked up to the workshop manager, who was listening to the woman with a suffering expression. The woman, it seemed, was very irritated and accompanied her words with energetic gestures. "May I know what happened?" He looked at the woman and smiled pleasantly. However, it wasn't difficult to smile at her genuinely. The woman, despite her nervous state, turned out to be a pretty young woman of about 25 with huge gray eyes, a turned-up nose, and long, light, fluffy bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello!" She turned sharply to Robert. "Another specialist. Am I supposed to tell everyone here the story? Maybe instead of chatting, one of you will finally work on my car?" "My dear young lady," Robert said softly, and was inwardly very surprised by the thoughtless but completely sincere word he had uttered. After Emily's death, he hadn't felt anything remotely resembling emotion towards any woman. "I am not your dear," Olivia interrupted him decisively. "All right, not dear, young lady," Robert said, not letting himself be flustered. "Let's calm down and figure out the situation. What exactly happened?" "Tell it again," she gasped indignantly. "Manager!" Robert looked questioningly at the manager standing nearby, who had been staring intently at the problem the whole time. "Owner, it's simple." The manager stepped forward decisively. "The woman," he glanced at the sheet of paper he held in his hand, "did indeed book an appointment with us, but during the phone call, unfortunately, she incorrectly stated the make of her car. And now it's become clear. I tried to explain to the lady that we can't repair her car because we don't have the equipment to repair cars of that make. She needs to go to a dealer's service center, but she won't listen to me. Well," the manager threw up his hands, his whole demeanor indicating what he thought of certain women who didn't understand a thing and didn't want to listen to intelligent people. "I see," Robert said, after listening to the manager, turning his gaze to the woman and smiling slightly. "I'm afraid we really can't help you, but I'll write down an address for you now, call them, and I think—" "Listen, I don't care what you think. Your sign says auto repair, right?" She pointed expressively at her car. "Car, right? So what does that mean?" She looked at Robert ironically. "It means you're going to repair it. But please understand, it's in your best interest." Robert paused for a few seconds, searching for arguments. "Look, if you suddenly get a toothache, God forbid, you'd go to a dentist. Not an eye doctor, right? And if you accidentally ended up at an eye doctor by mistake, you wouldn't demand that he treat your tooth anyway, would you? The manager snorted, trying to suppress a laugh. What nonsense, the woman mumbled, feigning inflexibility, although it was already clear that she was tired of arguing. But she decided to have the last word. Fine. I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors, and not just some manager or other boss. I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor, I don't know. In short, whoever is in charge here. Really, this is just unbelievable. A client comes, and they refuse them. What kind of business is this? She looked indignantly at the workshop employees who were stifling laughter, and who, having started listening to the conversation, were now eagerly awaiting the outcome. Well, that's your right. In that case, to avoid putting things off, allow me to introduce myself, Robert began. What do I care about you? She stamped her foot in indignation. Her rather high heel twisted. The young woman swayed and would have fallen if Robert hadn't caught her arm. A light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume wafted towards him. His cheek brushed against her silky hair for a second. And suddenly he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little frightened by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. The woman snatched her hand away from him, which he was still holding, and said, Anyway, get ready. You and you. She quickly pointed a finger at the manager and Robert. I'll make sure you're fired. Got it? She looked back indignantly at the mechanics, who were now openly laughing. The next day, he was working in his office at the company's central headquarters, and he was hardly surprised when the door burst open and the woman entered the room rapidly, with a stubborn expression on her face. Hello, I understand you're the owner of the auto repair shop? She sat down decisively in the chair opposite him. Well, I must tell you, with employees like the ones there, you'll soon be bankrupt. I bring my car, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't the right one. They've gotten completely out of line. Especially one of them there, not young. Instead of doing his job, he decided to hit on me, as if I care what his name is. Just tell... She stopped mid-sentence with a bewildered smile, having finally looked at Robert. A few seconds later, she used a gesture familiar to him to brush the too long bangs from her face and smiled sheepishly. Oh, it's you, the woman said in astonishment. Yes, it's me. My name is Robert, and I remember you. He got up from the desk and bowed gallantly. You're a jokester. It turns out you're the owner of this place. Then why were you in the workshop looking like that? That's strange. Well, why strange? It's quite normal. It would be strange if I worked in the workshop in a suit. All right, let's leave my strange behavior. Let's rather decide what we should do about you. Meaning? She asked in surprise. Well, you probably understand I can't fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself, Robert said seriously. Olivia looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. The laughter was so genuine and infectious that Robert couldn't help but laugh along with her. Easily and cheerfully, as he hadn't laughed in 2 years. Well, yes, I suppose my complaint is hopeless, she said, still sniffling with laughter. Well, all right then. It was nice meeting you, despite everything. She got up from the chair and extended her hand to him. He took the slender, narrow hand in his own and involuntarily covered it with his other hand, and he held it. Forgive my boldness, but perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me. As compensation for not repairing your car. After all, I still have to respond to your complaint, don't I? He said, astonished by his own words. Robert suddenly, for the first time since Emily's death, wanted to talk to a woman. To touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with that unusual tart fragrance. For him, this was a completely new sensation. His whole life, only 2 women had existed for him, his mother and his wife. All other members of the fair sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were simply people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Women's charms, which had been tried on him repeatedly, simply had no effect. He loved Emily. He only wanted to be with her. Thoughts of experiencing any new sensations related to women simply hadn't occurred to him. "Well, if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's my husband's fidelity," Emily used to laugh. "Your husband, by the way, is quite a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say? Right. Oh, look out. You'll sit around in your sweatpants, and someone will snatch your man." "Well, if they snatch him, then that's fate," Emily replied philosophically, but she was being sly. For some reason, she was completely confident in Robert, and every day in his eyes, she saw that her confidence was justified. "So, do you accept the offer?" He looked into Olivia's face and smiled. "You know I do," she suddenly replied. The young woman of about 20 was charming. At the same time, she made no attempt to make any special impression on Robert, to bewitch or seduce him. Apparently, she didn't care if her hair was perfectly in place, or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, she had an excellent appetite, and in her company, Robert ate with real pleasure for the first time in 2 years. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found an astonishing number of common topics for conversation. For example, she learned about Buddy the Labrador and was absolutely thrilled, turning out to be a longtime dog person. Despite the somewhat scandalous start to their acquaintance, she turned out to be an easygoing, cheerful, and kind person. "I don't even know what got into me," she laughed, recalling the scene she had made at the workshop. "Honestly, I've never acted like that before. It was like I went completely crazy. Please forgive me." "But first of all, not so formally, just by name. We agreed, didn't we?" Robert gently chided her. "And secondly, because of your dramatic entrance, I'm glad things turned out this way." "And I'm glad too, very," she suddenly replied. A year later, Robert, looking younger, with shining eyes and squared shoulders, sat in his office. He held a small velvet box in his hands. Inside lay a luxurious ring. A ring for that woman. I love her, he thought. Maybe as much as I loved Sarah once, or almost as much. I don't know. What's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife. Always. Or at least, for as long as possible. He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. All right. What if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and agrees? She's like that, she might. What should I do? Robert was afraid to voice the main, in fact, the only problem to himself. David. His possible reaction to all this. To the new woman. To the father who suddenly decided to keep living and not just live out his days. "David, I need to talk to you." Every word was a great effort for Robert. He couldn't sit still, jumped up, and paced the room. He went to the window, deliberately and carefully adjusted a fold in the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but stood up again after a couple of seconds. David hadn't uttered a word the whole time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on. "Dad," David finally said, "maybe you'll tell me what you wanted?" "What did I want to say?" Robert repeated senselessly, nervously straightening the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt. His hand was visibly trembling. "David, well, it's hard for me to tell you this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me. In short, I've met a woman," Robert finally said, what he felt were the hardest words of his life. "She's good, smart, decent, beautiful. Basically, I like her very much, and it seems, strange as it may be, she likes me too. I'd like to introduce you to her," he mumbled, not daring to look up at David. What about Mom? Came the voice from above him. What about Mom? David. He finally looked David in the eye. Mom is gone. She's been gone a long time. I loved your mother very much, David. Very much. And I still love her and miss her terribly. You know that perfectly well. Missing her? Really? Well, I'll be. David snorted ironically. But I see that doesn't stop you from starting up affairs. Don't you dare talk to me in that tone. Robert found the strength to look sternly at David. And choose your words carefully, please. Listen, Father. David called him Father, for the first time in his life, not Dad. This unfamiliar, somehow alien, as if forged word grated unpleasantly on Robert's ears. Maybe this is some kind of joke? You're playing a trick on me, aren't you? Come on, admit it. No, David, I'm not playing a trick on you. This isn't a joke. I really want to introduce you to this woman. I don't want to meet any woman, the young man shouted. Not with that kind, but with another, Robert corrected David. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't give a damn, understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Got it? David roared. All right then. Robert got up from the armchair and paced the room. He barely restrained himself from slapping David. I dare remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do. Now and in the future. Do you hear me? He looked at David. And if you don't like something, well, let's decide. Are we going to live together or not? Robert's voice didn't tremble or betray the turmoil that was raging in his soul and mind. It seemed he managed to appear decisive and firm. Because David stopped shouting and watched his father silently and attentively. And suddenly he blurted out, Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some— Careful, David, Robert interrupted him sharply. Careful. Think before you say something that can't be excused or fixed later. Dad, what are you doing? You're already over 50, and your heart's acting up. David, evidently changing tactics, brought out his heaviest, most ruthless arguments. What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire. Think about your pension. And you suddenly decided to start chasing women in your old age, David almost shouted, having completely crossed all boundaries. Robert listened to David's hysterical shouts. Of course, David, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it, with the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations. The young man was talking utter nonsense, and yet Robert clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he was about to face. My God, what am I doing? Robert suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to David's shouts. What am I doing? She's half my age, and David's reaction is typical. Everyone will think that, even if they don't say it. Absolutely everyone. Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you, darling, Olivia exclaimed with delight, throwing modesty aside. I really want to be your wife. Thank you, darling. I'm so happy. Only forgive me. We need to talk. He struggled to choose and force out the words, although he had run through this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. You see, I'm not exactly a young man, to put it mildly, he mumbled. I certainly do, very much so. I'm not a girl either, she snorted. Darling, but you know what I mean, don't you? He sighed painfully. Yes, I know, of course. Her voice became hard. You're significantly older, and I'm unforgivably young. And also, I'm marrying you solely for your money, to take everything from you and run off abroad with a young lover. Oh, and another thing. You have a bad heart, don't you? I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila, I inherit everything. They'll definitely tell you that many times too. Woman, he exclaimed. No, let's talk. Let's say all this nastiness out loud. I know all this perfectly well, darling, and I also know that you're ruining everything right now. You're ruining, perhaps, the happiest moment of my life. My dear, my darling, let's do this." She wiped away her tears, lifted her face, and looked him intently in the eyes. "Either you believe me completely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you, or right now, we say goodbye to each other." He looked into her eyes and believed. Once and for all. At least, at that moment, he thought it was forever. The new wife moved into their large apartment. David, by that time a second-year student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between David and his stepmother, despite Robert's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. Robert and his new wife and David. Even more incomprehensible and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between David and his stepmother, and Robert tried many times to find out exactly what. "David, what's going on?" "Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself just recently pointed that out to me." "Yeah, you really helped," David snorted ironically. "Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You talk about her, I talk about my life. That's it. Leave me alone." David cut him off. "David, don't you dare talk to me like that." Robert tried to bring David to order, and then immediately gave up. "David, how about I buy you an apartment?" Failing to get anything from David, he tried another approach. "Darling, we need to talk. What's happening between you and David?" "My darling, I wouldn't say everything is perfect, but basically nothing too terrible. A typical stepmother and stepson story. Well, stepmothers are never good in general, but I'm trying very hard. And anyway," she faltered. Robert felt that something very important was hidden behind David's aggression and his new wife's playfulness. And this something didn't let Robert live peacefully. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on the bench in the park, stroking Buddy's golden ears, wondering what to do. How could he understand what was happening in his home? And if he happened to hear something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. He had to see and understand everything himself, by himself. And he would have to do it without David's and Emily's knowledge. As much as he detested secretly watching them. "Deputy, hello." Robert dialed his deputy's number. "Please give me the phone number for the company that installed our video surveillance system." The next day, a sharp young man taught Robert the intricacies of surveillance. "The camera is tiny. You can install it anywhere. Better put it higher up so they don't accidentally stumble upon it." He lowered his voice mysteriously. "There's no sound, but the image quality will be top-notch at any distance. The company guarantees it." After installing the camera in the apartment's living room, Robert left for work. He sank tiredly into the armchair in his office and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. David was the first to come home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled directly opposite the camera. He turned on the huge wall-sized TV. The young man sat on the sofa in a loose, relaxed posture. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of being offended or deprived. His face, so much like his mother's, so dear and precious, caused Robert, watching the monitor, a pang of poignant, sharp love for his son. He agonizingly wanted to drop everything, run home, grab this long-legged, unruly-haired, snub-nosed creature, his little son, and hold him tight. Ask for forgiveness for everything done and not done. Tell him how much he loved David. Lost in his feelings, Robert didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. David's posture changed. He still remained on the sofa, but he tensed up, as if bristling. The familiar sullen, angry grimace appeared on his face. On the sofa, instead of the sweet, nice little son, a copy of his mother, sat a wary, angular young man from whom anxiety and aggression practically radiated. His new wife entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, They were talking. She smiled slightly, apparently asking David something. He, slouching further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put a crooked smirk on his face and evidently replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. Olivia turned and left the room. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. David didn't resemble a miserable outcast with an evil, suffering stepmother at all. And his new wife clearly hadn't turned into a fury in Robert's absence. Rather the opposite. It seemed David was behaving in his usual rude manner, while she was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. Robert, without knowing why, continued to watch David sitting in the living room. David suddenly looked in the direction where his stepmother had gone. He stood up and, with cautious movements, clearly trying not to make noise, moved towards Robert's study. Disappearing from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later. One hand was shoved into his jeans pocket, and it looked very much like he had just put something in there. The familiar dull ache settled in his chest on the left. Robert gasped. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient elder, lacking even the strength to move his legs. So, David had betrayed him after all. David, not his new wife. David was tormenting his stepmother and, it seemed, quietly taking money from the safe in the study. Well, at least that was easy enough to verify. That same evening, upon returning home, Robert discovered that a rather substantial sum had significantly dwindled over the past few weeks since he had last checked his safe. He didn't talk to David, but simply waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. A few days later, he saw David carry out a small rectangular box from the study, which contained the few but expensive jewels of his late mother, given to her by his father. Sarah loved wearing jewelry, calling them our diamond fund. "I need to talk to you," Robert said the next evening. "Well," David snapped back habitually. "Money has started disappearing from our house, and not just money." To give David credit, he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he wasn't very good at it. "Why are you so sure that I took the money?" David smiled awkwardly, or rather bared his teeth, hiding his fear behind it all. "There's another person in the apartment, a complete stranger, by the way. Maybe we should ask her? What if your young wife doesn't have enough?" "All right then," Robert ground out the words through clenched teeth, feeling the familiar dull ache in his chest. "The money, of course, if it's still intact, you can keep. Give me the jewels and get out." David left the room. A few minutes later, he returned. "Here's all your money." He threw the wallet at Robert's feet. "I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it. And I won't give you the jewels. They'll stay with me. You can call the police and file a theft report. I don't care. I won't give them up, even if they send me to prison." "These are Mom's jewels. I won't let some strange woman wear them. Do you hear?" By the end of the sentence, David's voice, trembling more and more, finally broke, and the young man, unable to bear it, sobbed. Robert watched David with wide eyes. Before his eyes, the shell of bitterness, cynicism, and lies seemed to peel away from him. Before him stood his beloved, only son, his and his late wife's, their golden boy. Confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions, but still his own dear son. He still hopelessly grieved for Sarah and had driven that grief so deep within himself that it had turned into hatred for his father, for his new wife, for the whole world around him, where his mother was not. "David, forgive me," Robert said softly. David lifted his tear-streaked face to Robert and quietly, in a barely audible whisper, said, "And you forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for this. And for her. I love you, Dad." Robert took a few steps and squeezed David's outstretched hand with all his might. And around them, jumping, barking happily, and shining with golden fur, rejoicing for reasons unknown even to himself, was Buddy.